This is the Old West Element 3 Part 4 regarding Native American policy in contemporary times, and we start with Native Americans in World War II. Now, as you know, from 1890 to contemporary times, there have been reservations all over America, particularly in the American West. But in the 1940s, thousands of Native American men and women left reservations to go work in urban factories, right alongside women that had joined the factory movement and also African Americans who had come up from the South, all of which were there to replace men who had left the factories to go fight in World War II. Another 25,000 Native Americans, though, also joined the military. In 1940, 90% of Native Americans lived on reservations, like you see here in the picture, but by 2000, over 50% would live in cities. It's a pretty substantial demographic and migration shift. Now, going back to World War II for a second here. We know already that 25,000 Native Americans joined the military and fought bravely, but some of the most famous contributions likely came from the Comanche code talkers in Europe and the Navajo code talkers in the Pacific. Now, when we say quote-unquote code talkers, we're saying that they became invaluable by transmitting radio messages in their native languages. In Europe, the Germans couldn't possibly understand what the Comanche were saying. It was just not anything they had ever studied or looked at. And the Japanese couldn't understand what the Navajo were saying in the Pacific either. They simply couldn't understand, quote-unquote, the code, which was really just the Native Americans speaking in their native languages. Now, one would think that these efforts would earn them a place of honor in society, and it did to a degree. However, in the 1950s, President Dwight D. Eisenhower attempted to cancel provisions of the Indian New Deal that we talked about in Part 3 and revert back to the policies of the Dawes Act of 1887. Now, if you remember, the Dawes Act ended tribal ownership of land and gave each individual Native American 160 acres of free land on a probationary basis if they could act like good white settlers. If they did, they could get full title to the land and full U.S. citizenship. Now, here we were 70 years later, and we were trying to return to those policies. Well, inevitably, that effort to return to the Dawes Act policies failed. Native Americans became part of the civil rights movement on a smaller scale in the 1960s, but it was really in the 1970s when they started making significant change. Inspired by the African American civil rights movement, Native American made gains through the courts and civil disobedience in the 1970s. In U.S. v. Wheeler of 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that tribes had a unique and limited sovereignty, or ability to not be influenced by other people, that was subject to Congress, not the states. In other words, Native American tribes on their reservations had a sovereignty that was not going to be influenced by states, but Congress still did have some say-so over it. However, by 2000, unemployment, poverty, and alcoholism still prevailed on reservations. Many tribes, under independent sovereignty status, decided to open casinos in an attempt to bring prosperity back. And with that, that's where we stand with Native American culture and policy today. It's kind of a long road from the days of the Iroquois Confederacy and things along those lines, but it has changed pretty significantly, and not for the better for Native Americans over the years, although they have attempted to make inroads and gain much more respect and honor in modern-day society. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.